The divine physician explained that the only way to save Junwang's dying daughter was to break and introduce yang energy into her body at the very moment the explosion began. Junwang reflected inwardly that even the abbot of Shaolin had failed to accomplish such a feat, which meant it had to be true if it came from the divine physician. Confusion and anguish weighed heavily on him as he questioned how something so terrible could have happened to his daughter. Munku repeatedly muttered about balancing yin and yang, her expression vacant and unfocused as the words spilled from her lips. She rejected the idea outright in her heart, tears welling up as she buried her face in her hands. Yowon let out a quiet sigh while thinking about the mention of another woman. He resolved that he would love only one woman for the rest of his life, having already learned through the tragedy surrounding the six sects that having multiple wives and children only led to chaos. Hosangwa remained lost in thought, concluding that this was likely how the Demon Lord was reasoning. She believed the Demon Lord was the type of man to fully commit to any decision he made. Hosangwa felt that this choice was correct if it meant saving the woman's life, even though she felt deep sympathy for Munku. Logically, she recognized it as a rare opportunity to place Junwang, the unrivaled sword, and one of the 5 great martial artists of Morim under their debt and secure him as an ally. As hesitation spread through the group, Gamrosu urged them to stop wasting time. Gamrosu explained that the acupuncture needles were merely suppressing the cold by regulating the flow of her internal energy, and that this method would not extend her lifespan. Bunwang called out to his father, and Junwang responded instinctively. Bunwang admitted that he disliked the idea being discussed, but insisted that saving Yogen's life had to come first. When Junwang questioned him, Bunwang stated firmly that nothing else would matter if she died. Junwang's expression darkened at his son's words. He wrestled with his thoughts, acknowledging that the method was meant to save his daughter. Yet as a father, he questioned whether it was right to surrender her body to a man he had never met. Even if he allowed it, that man would have to take responsibility for her. The thought of entrusting his precious daughter to another man tormented him. Though that man held great status and martial prowess, rivaling the 5 great martial artists, Junwang could tell he deeply valued a certain woman, despite not expressing it openly. That woman seemed highly ranked within the cult and was surely destined to be his wife. The realization that his own daughter might become a concubine to the leader of the demonic cult filled him with bitterness. He recalled hearing that past demonic cult leaders had multiple wives, though this one did not appear obsessed with women. As Junwang sank deeper into thought, the sound of his daughter's labored breathing reached his ears. Grinding his teeth, Junwang cursed himself inwardly, realizing how foolish he had been. He resolved that he should be willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to save his daughter. Junwang stepped forward and bowed deeply before Yowon, declaring that although he had sworn never to bow or ask favors of anyone in his life, he would break that vow today. He then dropped to both knees. Shock rippled through everyone present at his sudden action. Yowon frowned and tried to help him stand, but Junwang firmly refused, shaking his head. In a voice filled with desperation, Junwang begged Yowon to save his daughter's life, asking him not as a martial artist but as a father. He then lowered his head and struck it against the floor in supplication. Yowon was deeply troubled by the sight. With Junwang pleading like this, Yowon knew he had been cornered. If he refused, Junwang would certainly turn against him. Yowon considered inwardly that he was not afraid of making an enemy of Junwang. However, doing so would cost him the chance to gain one of the 5 great martial artists as an ally. More importantly, he believed it was the right decision to prevent a repeat of the tragedy involving the 6 great sects within his own cult, though he was certain it would not happen. The thought of another woman bearing his child crossed his mind. At that moment, Nano's voice reached him, explaining that if birth control was desired, self-sterilization mode was possible. Yowon was startled, briefly questioning the meaning. Nano clarified that the nano machine could block the vas deferens to prevent sperm from entering semen during intercourse, describing it as more effective than a vasectomy. Yowon was left speechless by the explanation, though hesitation still lingered in his thoughts. Then Munku's telepathic voice reached him. Yowon turned toward her and saw her lifting her head, looking at him with unwavering determination. She conveyed that she was deeply saddened and heartbroken. Yowon found himself unable to respond, recalling the promise he had made to her that night at the inn, to love only her and take her as his sole wife. Munku reminded him that while she was a woman he loved, she was first and foremost a cultist of the great demonic cult and his trusted subordinate. She saw no reason to refuse assistance that would benefit the cult. Though tears filled her eyes, her resolve remained firm. She urged Yowon to act, stating that she already understood his feelings. Yowon responded inwardly that if she truly did not want this, he would not proceed. succeed. Monku admitted that she hated the situation, yet could not ignore Junwang's desperate pleas. She reflected that if her own father were alive, he would likely beg in the same way. She also expressed sorrow that such a beautiful person was facing death after suffering from the 9 yin meridian collapse. Yowon reacted with confusion at her words, insisting inwardly that to him, Monku was the most beautiful woman in the world. Embarrassment overtook her, and she turned her head away, blushing. Yowon reaffirmed inwardly that she was still the only one in his heart. Monku responded with guarded acceptance, stating that she would be understanding since a life was at stake, but warned that she would be watching him closely and that he was to keep his eyes on her alone. Yowon agreed, feeling a sense of relief once she accepted the situation. Yowon then bent down, helped Junwang to his feet, and spoke gently, stating that he could not refuse a father who was trying to save his daughter. Junwang's expression immediately brightened with hope. He pleaded once more for his daughter's life, and Yowon affirmed that he would save her. Junwang grasped Yowon's hand as he begged. Gamrosu expressed relief at Yowon's decision and urged them to hurry, warning that if they delayed any longer, even balancing Yogun's yin and yang would no longer be enough to save her. Yowon asked what he should do. Gamrosu cleared her throat and glanced around in response to the question. Hobom immediately understood her intention and announced that everyone should leave, noting that the divine physician seemed to wish to speak with the demon lord in private. Junwang and the members of Yowon's forces exited the guest house with visible embarrassment. Once they were gone, Gamrosu explained the procedure Yowon would have to follow. After detailing everything, she emphasized the most critical point. She warned that Yogun would resist fiercely once the process began, that it would become a serious struggle, and that Yowon must not stop midway. She then wished him luck. Yowon questioned inwardly whether this was truly something one should be wished luck for. Finding it difficult to respond at all, Yowon simply nodded. He lifted Yogun into his arms and entered a private room within the building. After laying her down on the bed, he took a deep breath. He recalled Gamrosu's instructions, thinking that he first needed to loosen Yogun's pressure points so her chi could circulate. He recognized that if she woke up, it could turn into a violent confrontation. Accepting that this was unavoidable, he decided he had to remove her clothing first. As Yowon carefully removed the clothes covering her, Yogun suddenly opened her eyes. Only a short time had passed since her blood points were sealed, yet she was already awakening. A burst of cold energy erupted from her body and violently hurled Yowon upward. He crashed into the ceiling, shaking the roof of the guest house. Those waiting outside looked on with alarm as the building trembled. Hobom muttered that it seemed things had become extremely intense. Junwang, Bunwang, and Monku immediately shot him hostile glares. Feeling uneasy, Junwang turned and walked away from the building, while Monku turned aside with tears welling in her eyes. Hosangwa struck Hobom on the back of the head in frustration. Moments later, everyone felt an overwhelming wave of freezing energy and turned back toward the guest house. After a crushing sound, they saw frost rapidly spreading across the walls of the building. Hosangwa and Hobom realized something was wrong and attempted to rush forward, but the divine physician stopped them. Gamrosu warned them not to interfere, explaining that Yogun was merely waking up. She stated that if anyone entered and disrupted the process, everything would be rendered meaningless. The guest house continued to tremble as if a deadly battle were taking place inside. After some time, the violent impacts and explosions subsided, replaced by faint, strained sounds from within. Hosangwa flushed with embarrassment as she realized what those sounds implied. In contrast, Gamrosu's expression brightened. The clash between intense cold energy and surging yang chi filled the area with thick fog, making it impossible to see anything clearly. Inside, Yowon focused entirely on releasing his yang chi and guiding it into Yogun's body. He reminded himself inwardly that he had to concentrate completely on transferring his yang energy. He knew that even the smallest mistake could cause her veins to freeze over and end her life. Yowon attempted the method Gamrosu had instructed him to use. When Yogun's yin chi came into contact with his body, it initially showed no reaction. Then Yowon felt it clearly. Yin chi began flowing into him. The sheer scale and density of it shocked him. He wondered how she had been able to maintain such an enormous amount of energy within her body. He began circulating the yin chi through himself, intending to guide it outward and release it. At that moment, something completely unexpected occurred. As the endless, natural source of yin chi poured in, another dormant power inside Yowon awakened. The heavenly demonic energy stirred. The terrifying energy rose from its slumber and immediately began to grow beyond Yowon's control. It latched onto the surging yin chi as if it had found prey, voraciously absorbing it. Yowon tried to suppress it, but the heavenly demonic energy continued consuming the cold energy, swelling further with every moment. Realizing he could not calm it directly, Yowon decided to release his own yang chi to maintain balance. However, even though he could draw upon environmental energy, he could not properly control the overwhelming power he had already absorbed. As the yin chi was drawn away from her body, a change began. Yogun's transparent, lifeless eyes gradually regained color. As the blockage within her opened, her eyes returned to a normal brown, and her condition stabilized. Yowon realized that the treatment was working. However, the danger had shifted entirely onto him. A biting cold spread through his body, and he felt as though his blood itself was freezing. Cold air escaped his mouth with every breath. Nano immediately responded by increasing Yowon's body temperature. Even so, Yowon realized the gravity of the situation. The heavenly demonic energy had devoured all of Yogun's yin chi, leaving him unable to expel it from his body. An excessive amount of yin now flooded the heavenly demon sword arts, a martial art rooted in yang energy. He understood that he had absorbed nearly all of her yin energy and now had to deal with the imbalance within himself. If he left it unattended, the consequences would be severe. At that moment, Yowon himself began to undergo a change. Outside the guest house, roughly 30 minutes had passed. Junwang, the unrivaled sword, returned to the area and waited anxiously for the treatment to end. Though he had resolved to do anything to save his daughter, the situation still weighed heavily on him as her father. He thought of his late wife and wondered what choice she would have made if she were here. After staring silently at the blue sky, Junwang suddenly felt something unusual. He sensed that the cold energy was receding, yet another presence, violent and savage, was rapidly growing in its place. It felt nothing like cold, but rather like a roaring beast. Bunwang noticed the disturbance as well and urgently called out to his father, sensing that something was wrong within the guest house. Junwang acknowledged that he felt it too and told his son to follow him. The two rushed toward the guest house where Gamrosu stood frozen in shock. Junwang grabbed her arm and demanded to know what was happening. Gamrosu could only admit that she did not know either. Junwang realized inwardly that even the divine physician, who had never trained in martial arts, was trembling from the pressure of the energy. It felt as though someone was forcibly expelling it in a violent rage. At that moment, the frozen wall of the guest house cracked apart and shattered. The entire building exploded, collapsing into ruins. From within the rising cloud of dust, Yowon emerged. Munku arrived after sensing the disturbance and rushed forward, calling out to Yowon with a look full of concern. Junwang shouted his daughter's name in shock, only to see that Yogun lay unconscious. Panic surged through him as he tried to get a response from Yowon and hurried forward to check on his daughter's condition. Junwang urgently attempted to reach Yowon, but there was no reply. Suddenly, Yowon's eyes snapped open with a fierce glare. Junwang instinctively flinched. Yowon reacted violently, flinging his arm to the side. A massive surge of energy erupted outward, slicing through the courtyard ground of the guest house. Junwang narrowly avoided the attack by moving instantly. The energy resembled blade chi, yet it spread far wider than normal, tearing through the ruins of the building. What shocked everyone most was that the ground it struck instantly froze. Junwang quickly looked back at his daughter and confirmed that her condition had improved, her skin color returning to normal. Relief washed over him as he realized the treatment had succeeded, though Yowon's condition defied explanation. Junwang concluded inwardly that savage energy and the lingering cold of the 9 yin meridian collapse were coexisting within Yowon's body. His unfocused eyes suggested that he was unconscious. The possibility of chi deviation struck Junwang with dread. For a martial artist of Yowon's level, such a condition was effectively a death sentence. Junwang knew he had to wake him. He grabbed Yowon's arm and tried to rouse him. Instead, Yowon lashed out again, thrusting toward Junwang. Junwang narrowly tilted his head aside to avoid the strike. Junwang realized that Yogun would also be in danger if Yowon remained like this. He decided he had to move Yowon somewhere isolated. Apologizing inwardly for what he was about to do, Junwang gathered his energy and unleashed a precise, powerful strike. The force hit Yowon cleanly, sending his body flying into the air as Junwang raised his hands. Observers were stunned by the sight, noting that Junwang had not inflicted a single visible injury despite the strength of his attack, reaffirming his status as one of the 5 great martial artists. Junwang felt a brief surge of relief, believing he had succeeded, and prepared to hurl Yowon toward the empty garden where no one would be harmed. However, the sword sword energy meant to carry Yowon away suddenly detonated and violently countered his attempt. Yowon suddenly leapt into the air and charged straight at Junwang as if he now recognized him as an enemy. Junwang immediately retreated, stepping out from the ruined remains of the building. Yowon turned without hesitation and pursued him. He reached out mid-charge. The white dragon blade shot out from beneath the scattered debris of the guest house. Yowon seized it in midair and continued his assault toward Junwang. Junwang called out to his son, and Bunwang instantly understood his intent. He pulled one of the great swords from his back and hurled it forward. Junwang caught it in midair and swung it to block Yowon's incoming strike. When the two attacks collided, the sound of iron crashing echoed violently through the area. A raging storm of energy erupted, cracking the ground beneath them. The pressure was overwhelming, far beyond what Gamrosu, an ordinary elderly woman, could withstand, and her body was thrown backward. Hobum rushed forward and caught her before she could hit the ground. Among Yowon's followers, the same realization spread. Just as Junwang feared, Yowon was likely suffering from circulation failure. His loss of sanity and indiscriminate attacks left no other explanation. Junwang narrowed his eyes as he faced Yowon head-on. From the beginning, he had known Yowon was no ordinary man, but the power clashing against him now was nearly equal to his own. Even more alarming was the cold energy flowing through Yowon. Junwang felt the chill seeping through the greatsword in his hands. The blade rapidly turned icy, forcing him to circulate his own energy to keep it from freezing solid. Yet Yowon's cold energy showed no sign of diminishing, as if it were endless. Junwang realized inwardly that Yowon might have absorbed the cold energy instead of expelling it. The thought horrified him. Even someone capable of circulating natural energy would suffer severe internal collision if they absorbed such an immense amount of yin energy, resulting in catastrophic chi blockage. Junwang understood that he no longer had a choice. Yowon had to be subdued. Junwang shouted for Bunwang again and extended his left hand. Bunwang immediately threw another greatsword toward him. As Junwang caught it, he inwardly apologized to Yowon and charged forward, aiming to sever Yowon's right arm and strip him of his ability to continue fighting. Munku and Hobum turned pale and cried out in horror, but it was already too late. Junwang's blade was nearly upon Yowon's right shoulder. At that instant, the black arm guards encasing Yowon's arms separated and reassembled themselves, transforming into a black sword that intercepted the greatsword's strike. Junwang recoiled in shock and leapt backward, stunned by what he had just witnessed. As Yowon grasped its hilt, ominous black force chi surged around the blade. Junwang stared in disbelief at the sight of Yowon wielding two entirely different weapons at once. He realized inwardly that Yowon might have restrained both yin and yang energies simultaneously, something Junwang had never heard of in his life. Yowon's breathing grew heavy as his eyes slowly began to regain their normal clarity. Heavenly demonic energy referred to the violent, dark force dwelling within the heavenly demon sword. Unlike ordinary energies, it felt disturbingly alive and ferocious. It had long remained dormant within Chun Yowon's energy core, and because of how difficult it was to control, even Yowon had deliberately refrained from using it. Earlier, Yowon had believed this energy merely amplified his own chi. In truth, it was a devourer. He realized that the heavenly demonic energy had done far more than intensify his chi. It had absorbed all of the yin energy, leaving him unable to expel it from his body. As Yowon forcefully circulated his energy, blood spilled from his mouth. He understood that he now needed to generate an overwhelming amount of yang energy to counterbalance the yin. The presence of two opposing forces within his body was already dangerous, but the sheer quantity had surpassed what his body should have been able to endure. NANO immediately responded by repairing the internal damage to Yowon's 5 viscera and 6 entrails. Yowon realized that without NANO continuously healing his internal injuries, he would have collapsed long ago. At that moment, a realization struck him. If he could not remove either energy, then he would force them to exist together. Instead of allowing them to collide, he would compel coexistence. As Yowon contemplated how to merge the two forces, his mind slipped into a deep trance. When his awareness returned, the change had already taken place. The yin chi from the cold blood blockage and the heavenly demonic energy were no longer clashing. They had fused into a single harmonious flow, resembling true yin and yang. Those watching nearby were left stunned by the sight. Junwang urgently checked on Yowon's condition, sensing that something extraordinary had occurred. Yowon realized that Junwang had been the one restraining him while he was consumed by rage, and gratitude stirred within him. Yet something strange was still unfolding. The aura of the white dragon blade was being stained black, while the enhanced black sword began emitting an unmistakable cold energy. Yowon understood then that the yin energy and the heavenly demonic energy were no longer in conflict. They were stabilizing one another. Munku, alarmed by the transformation, turned to Junwang for an explanation. Junwang observed that Yowon was actively balancing the opposing energies within his body. What astonished him most was the rapid expansion of Yowon's inner energy. Even at a glance, it was clear that Yowon had grown far stronger than before. His inner energy alone now surpassed Junwang's own, pushing into a realm of power that Junwang himself had yet to reach. That was exactly what was happening to Yowon. He released both weapons, letting them fall into the ground, and lowered himself into a seated position. Black steam and intense cold began to pour from his body, spreading outward. A strained sound escaped him as everyone around fell silent, watching in awe. Instinctively, they all understood that Yowon was breaking into a new realm. Explosive waves of power rippled through the area, drawing cultists from all directions. Hosangwa stepped forward and blocked them from approaching any closer. The gathered cultists anxiously asked whether something was happening to the Demon Lord, shaken by the violent noise and the overwhelming aura surrounding the courtyard. Hosangwa declared that the Demon Lord was in the process of reaching a new realm. Stunned murmurs followed, and Hosangwa firmly ordered everyone to withdraw, warning them not to interrupt him. The cultists immediately complied and retreated. Once the area had cleared, Junwang turned to Gamrosu and asked her to examine Yogun. Gamrosu confirmed that the treatment had been successful and that the raging yin energy within Yogun's body had subsided. Junwang reacted in disbelief before relief overwhelmed him. When Gamrosu suggested taking Yogun inside for further observation, Junwang's eyes filled with tears. Years of struggle and desperation finally felt rewarded as he realized his daughter would survive. She asked if he would accompany her to the medical room, but Junwang declined, stating that he had something else to attend to first. He entrusted Yogun to Gamrosu's care and instructed Bunwang to assist her. When his son asked what he planned to do, Junwang replied that he needed to repay his debt to Lord Chun. Junwang then positioned himself nearby, standing guard over Yowon as he remained in a deep trance. The courtyard ground froze solid, coated in black ice. The cold energy saturating the guest house became so vicious that most guards could barely endure it. Junwang alone remained unaffected, able to withstand the pressure. Suddenly, all of the surrounding energy surged inward and was violently drawn into Yowon's body. It was clear that the harmonization of energies had succeeded. Shock rippled through Yowon's attendants as they noticed his body beginning to change. Cracks spread across his skin, an unmistakable sign. They immediately recognized the phenomenon: body reconstruction. Body reconstruction was the transformation the body underwent to adapt to a new level of power. Yowon had experienced it once before upon reaching the peak of the Superior Master realm. This time, it was happening again. Yowon's bones began to change as his body trembled, and deep cracks spread across his skin. After a long while, the violent movement of Yowon's body finally came to a stop. Munku stared at him anxiously, wondering if it was over and what kind of change he had undergone. At that moment, the cracked skin covering Yowon's body crumbled and burst apart, turning into fine powder that scattered away. After shedding the shell of his past self, the Demon Lord's new form drew silent admiration from everyone present. To them, it seemed as though his physique itself had reached perfection. Munku, who had already seen Yowon's bare body before, felt her face grow warm as she realized once again how strikingly beautiful it was. Junwang sensed the change immediately. Just moments earlier, Yowon had been releasing energy powerful enough to make even him tremble. Now, Yowon felt like an ordinary man. His energy was completely restrained and flawlessly controlled. Junwang realized that Yowon might have reached the original reversal realm, a state where one could freely command both internal and external energies. Overcome with excitement, Junwang congratulated Yowon, expressing that he had never imagined witnessing someone achieve the very stage he himself had long yearned to reach. Yowon's followers dropped to their knees in unison, shouting their congratulations for his ascension in power. Yowon smiled quietly, realizing that a simple act of saving a woman's life had granted him an extraordinary gift. Junwang then addressed Yowon again, acknowledging that he had stepped into an entirely new level of power. Filled with eagerness, Junwang expressed his desire to see that power tested and offered himself for the purpose. A wave of excitement rippled through Yowon's followers. The thought of a clash between their lord and one of the 5 great martial artists sent shivers through them. Yowon met Junwang's gaze for a moment and smiled, accepting the idea and expressing his wish for the same. The party selected the Grains Gate Plains, a location not far from the northern outpost of the demonic cult in the Hanam region. Strict instructions were issued that the duel between one of the 5 great martial artists and the Demon Lord was to be conducted with absolute secrecy. A complete lockdown was enforced, ensuring that nothing, not even an insect, could enter within a 2-kilometer radius. The order was acknowledged without hesitation. Violent explosions continued to erupt across the plains. Those stationed stood far away turned toward the thunderous sounds and froze in shock. Time and again, Yowon's formations were blocked. No matter how Yowon attacked, Junwang countered each move through a different method. Yet Junwang himself felt the mounting pressure. He was forced to continuously generate sword movements just to keep Yowon at a fixed distance. He understood that allowing Yowon any freedom of movement would be disastrous, as Yowon's sword formations were far too dangerous at close range. Yowon leapt upward, found a brief opening, and struck downward with the Heavenly Demon Sword, Black Force Chi roaring along its edge. Junwang reacted instantly, raising both greatswords to defend. Junwang realized inwardly that his greatsword felt increasingly heavy due to the shoulder injury he had suffered earlier. His chi was steadily being drained as well, and if the battle dragged on, the disadvantage would become unavoidable. He resolved to end the duel with a single decisive attack. Junwang moved in a flash and slashed cleanly through Yowon's position. When he turned to confirm the strike, his eyes widened in shock. What he had cut through was nothing more than an afterimage. Others watching were equally stunned as Yowon vanished from sight entirely. Bunwang shouted a warning, but it came too late. Yowon had already appeared behind Junwang, thrusting his black sword forward. Sensing the attack, Junwang spun around instantly and raised both great swords to block. As Yowon's blade descended, Yowon kicked off the air itself, propelling his body backward and vanishing once more. Junwang was momentarily stunned as Yowon disappeared from his vision, only to descend again from above and launch another strike. Junwang immediately understood what he was witnessing. Yowon was using the Wind God's stepping skill at the peak realm. Junwang praised the power of the attack even as he defended, lifting both great swords once more. The impact forced him back 5 full steps. Hobum trembled violently, barely able to believe what he was seeing. Munku anxiously wondered whether one of them might be seriously injured at this rate. Young Danhwa, however, remained calm and pointed out that neither combatant was using murderous intent or ultimate techniques. Even so, a massive crater had already formed at the center of their duel. Danhwa recognized that despite their restraint, the force they were unleashing was overwhelming. If it continued like this, the entire area would soon be reduced to ruins. When they finally came to a halt, Junwang felt that the exchange had been sufficient and asked Yowon for a favor. Yowon agreed without hesitation. Junwang then requested to witness what Yowon had gained upon reaching the end of the Mystic Realm. Yowon warned that it could be dangerous, but Junwang showed no concern, confident that his status as one of the 5 great martial artists was not without reason. Inwardly, Junwang acknowledged that he still had a secret technique he could rely on if things became uncontrollable. Yowon accepted, admitting that he himself also wished to verify it. He returned the Heavenly Demon Sword to its arm guard form. This action alone startled Junwang, as retracting the weapon suggested that what followed was related not to form, but to energy itself. Yowon brought his fingers together and aimed toward Junwang. Junwang wondered what Yowon intended to do, and Yowon revealed that he had gained 2 realizations. At that moment, an overwhelming surge of energy burst forth from Yowon, engulfing the entire area. A freezing cold expanded outward for more than 1,000 feet, and black ice rapidly formed, shaping itself into an ice sword identical to the technique Yogen had displayed during her berserk state. Junwang was aware that Yowon had absorbed yin chi, but even so, the sight left him stunned. That was only the beginning. More than 100 ice swords materialized and floated in the air, circling Junwang from all directions. Junwang tightened his grip on his great swords, realizing this was power far beyond what he had imagined. The pressure alone was overwhelming. Then, without warning, every ice sword shattered at once. Junwang, who had been preparing to defend, was left momentarily stunned. He questioned why the attack had stopped, and Yowon conveyed that this ability was inferior to his second realization. Before Junwang could fully grasp what that meant, a blue light appeared around Yowon. The lights gathered together, slowly taking the shape of a sword. This blue radiance resembled Force Chi, yet it was fundamentally different. It did not coat a weapon or limb, but existed independently as pure energy. This was Yowon's true discovery. As Yowon extended his hand toward Junwang, 12 sword-shaped Force Chi shot forward like bolts of lightning. Junwang was struck by shock and immediately moved to defend, swinging his great swords at full speed. Even so, the assault overwhelmed him. One of the sword forces sliced into his lower back, forcing him to turn and counterattack. Yet the moment one blade was destroyed, another instantly replaced it, continuing the relentless barrage. Junwang was pushed entirely onto the defensive, struggling just to keep up. Those watching from nearby were left in disbelief, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Even Bunwang, observing his father's struggle firsthand, realized the gravity of the situation. His father was blocking the attacks, yet he was still being driven to the brink. Baekji realized inwardly that Yoan had manifested a physical form of his enlightened sword aura, with every single sword executing a different technique. He had never even heard of Chi sword control reaching such a level. To him, it was clear that the Demon Lord had transcended human limits. Junwang was being pushed to the brink. Attack after attack continued without pause, leaving him no room to breathe. He realized that he did not even have the chance to activate his secret technique. Any momentary lapse would result in his death. This was not merely a matter of strength. The scale of inner energy required to sustain such an assault was incomprehensible. Junwang could not tell whether Yoan's inner energy was simply vast or truly endless. Time had lost meaning, and he questioned whether the onslaught would ever end. At last, the realization struck him that he could no longer endure it. After desperately defending himself, Junwang called out for Yoan to stop. The sword forces suspended in the air halted instantly. Junwang released his grip, allowing both greatswords to fall to the ground. Sweat drenched his face as he gasped for breath, utterly spent. Yoan looked at him calmly and asked whether he intended to continue. Junwang stared back in disbelief, then slowly shook his head. Acknowledging defeat, he admitted that he had lost and declared Yoan the victor. Yoan smiled quietly. With that, one of the 5 great martial artists of Morim accepted defeat at the hands of Chun Yoan. The 3 mountains lay on the southwestern side of Kangso Castle. A river known as the Yangtze flowed through the center of the mountain range, splitting it in 2. With 3 prominent peaks rising across the northern and southern sides, the area had earned its name. Near these mountains stood a vast mansion, built on a scale that resembled a royal palace. Within the mansion, inside a private office, a middle-aged man with long hair and narrow eyes listened to a report. His name was Lee Wook. As the briefing continued, his expression steadily darkened, revealing his growing displeasure. After hearing enough, Lee Wook asked whether the centipede left behind by Lee Baek had exploded. The man reporting confirmed that it had. Lee Wook then demanded to know whether anyone had gone down to retrieve it. Although he referred to it vaguely, the subordinate understood that Lee Wook meant the treasure left behind by their founder. The answer was no. Lee Wook slammed his fist against the desk in fury. He shouted that even if they failed to recover the treasure, they should have at least brought back his brother's body. The subordinate apologized in panic. The report continued, explaining that agents stationed nearby had immediately searched the area, yet neither the swordmaster's body nor the bodies of his subordinates could be found. Lee Wook's eyebrows rose sharply when he heard this. He questioned whether the entire sword group squadron had vanished. That squadron consisted of 150 elite warriors led by a superior master-level commander, a force capable of wiping out several sects overnight. The subordinate clarified that not all were missing. 105 bodies were unaccounted for, while 59 had fallen into the hands of the Blue Heaven Society. Lee Wook questioned whether the Blue Heaven Society was responsible. His doubt was clear. Before sending Lee Baek into Sword Valley, he had already investigated the forces stationed there. Aside from one officer guarding a hidden mansion, the Blue Heaven Society had only 40 men present, far too few to annihilate an entire squadron. The subordinate agreed, reporting that there were no signs of additional Blue Heaven Society forces mobilizing, which suggested that a third party had intervened. Lee Wook erupted in rage, demanding to know who had dared interfere with their plans. Without the book, he believed his brother's death had been utterly meaningless. At that moment, the reporting man retrieved an item from behind his back. He urged Lee Wook to calm himself and explained that the Blade Master had instructed him to deliver it. When Lee Wook asked what it was, the man revealed a scroll wrapped in red silk and embroidered with golden dragons. Lee Wook immediately unsealed the scroll and read its contents. The letter was written in elegant calligraphy and bore a dignified seal at the end. As he read, he realized that the third step of the grand plan was finally beginning. However, as he continued reading, Lee Wook frowned. The designated location was Tonghu Bay, a place situated at the lowest reaches of the region. He questioned whether the plan truly had to be carried out there. The subordinate explained that the location was not always fixed. After a moment of thought, Lee Wook decided that the risk did not matter. Regardless of the location, the plan itself would remain unchanged. He clenched his fist, his anger still simmering, eager for bloodshed to ease it. Far to the north, at the demonic cult's outpost in the Hanam region, an old woman cried uncontrollably as she clutched a baby to her chest. Gamrosu wailed beside the lifeless body of her granddaughter, Gam Miang, her grief overwhelming. She questioned through tears why her granddaughter had returned to her in such a tragic state. Danhwa observed her quietly, recognizing from her cries that the loss she felt was genuine and profound. Gamrosu clenched her teeth as rage surged through her body trembling while curses filled her mind. Hatred burned within her as she swore that she would never forgive the Blue Heaven Society for killing her granddaughter. Danhwa observed her quietly, hoping inwardly that she would preserve that rage for the sake of the demonic cult. At the same time, inside the medical room near the main building of the outpost, a quiet conversation was taking place. Yogen sat on one of the beds while her father stood beside her, watching her closely. Junwang asked about her condition, relieved to see that she had recovered. Yogen reassured him and apologized for making him worry, but expressed distress over her hair, which had failed to return to its original color. She felt as though she had aged unnaturally. Junwang dismissed her concern immediately, telling her that she was beautiful beyond measure. He believed she was like a blooming flower, and insisted that no woman in Morim could surpass her beauty. Yogen felt embarrassed by his praise and urged him to stop. As Junwang looked at his daughter, he thought of his late wife and knew she would have been proud, yet a heavy realization soon settled over him as memories of what had occurred earlier resurfaced, refusing to leave his mind. Junwang acknowledged inwardly that the act had been necessary to heal Yogen's meridian collapse, but the reality remained that a man and a woman had crossed an irreversible boundary. To him, marriage could no longer be avoided. He judged the Demon Lord to be an upright man, and in truth, no one seemed more suitable as a son-in-law. His martial prowess alone was beyond question, and given his potential, Junwang believed he might one day surpass all martial artists under the heavens. As the leader of one of the three greatest powers of the Morim, he possessed both strength and authority to protect Yogun. Even if she were to resent him for it, Junwang believed this might be the best match for her future. After clearing his throat, Junwang hesitantly addressed Yogun. Before he could continue, Yogun asked whether it was true that he had lost to the Demon Lord. Junwang reacted in shock, immediately demanding to know who had told her. When Yogun mentioned Hobum's name, Junwang exploded with anger inwardly, furious that Hobum had carelessly spoken about the duel. He realized that Hobum must have revealed it while escorting the divine physician. Yogen then declared that she had made a decision. Junwang was caught off guard and asked what she meant. Yogen calmly stated that if he allowed it, she wished to be with the Demon Lord. Junwang was left speechless, briefly wondering whether she had made this choice because of his defeat. Yogen denied it firmly, stating that she would never make such an important decision for such a shallow reason. When Junwang asked her why, Yogen explained her reasoning. She had learned from both Hobum and her brother that the Demon Lord had saved her despite already loving another woman. She understood how difficult such a decision must have been. To risk everything for another woman while already bound by love was not something just anyone could do. Junwang scoffed and dismissed her reasoning, insisting that men were not as loyal as she believed, and reminding her that he had warned her about this before. Yogen calmly pointed out that he was a man as well. Junwang immediately retorted that he was different from other men. Yogen acknowledged that he was different, but stated that he was misunderstanding her intentions. When Junwang questioned her, Yogen clarified that she had no intention of marrying the Demon Lord. She explained that he had saved her from the brink of death, a debt she could not repay lightly, and that she could not simply ignore such a favor. Junwang realized what she was implying and reacted in disbelief. Yogen confirmed it. She declared that she wished to enter the Heavenly Demon Divine cult and repay the Demon Lord for saving her life, reminding her father that he had always taught her to return what she received. Junwang was stunned and questioned whether she truly understood what she was saying. He bluntly pointed out that even if it had been for healing, they had still slept together, and yet she was choosing to enter the cult instead of marrying him. Yogen responded firmly that she was a woman of Morim and refused to marry simply because she had slept with someone. She also reminded him that the Demon Lord already loved another woman. Frustration overwhelmed Junwang, and he shouted that people still married despite such circumstances, emphasizing her status as his daughter. He insisted that if she refused to become a second wife because of the Demon Lord's love life, then he would personally discuss the matter with him. Yogen shouted back, protesting fiercely and demanding to know why he could not understand her words. She repeated that it was not what she wanted and questioned how many times she had to say it before he would listen. Junwang was left speechless. His daughter, who had never once raised her voice at him, was now shouting in defiance. Yogen declared that she was not that kind of woman and stated that she needed to know someone properly before even considering marriage. Junwang hesitated before conceding that she was right. Yogen then added that she wanted Junwang and Bunwang to come with her. When Junwang asked what she meant, Yogen reminded him of his promise to protect her and Bunwang for her mother's sake. Junwang, still stunned by her unexpected words, finally understood her resolve. What he had initially dismissed as a fleeting or strange idea was, in fact, a clear decision. Junwang admitted inwardly that Yogen was right. It was foolish foolish to force marriage solely because of physical relations, and repaying their debt by joining the cult was the more reasonable path. Clearing his throat, Junwang agreed to her wish, stating that if this was truly what she wanted and she did not harbor romantic feelings for the Demon Lord, then they would proceed as she desired. Junwang allowed himself a brief, self-satisfied thought, believing he still came first in his daughter's heart. Yogun then calmly added that she might come to like the Demon Lord if she spent more time with him. Junwang was struck speechless once again, inwardly lamenting that even though she was his own daughter, the minds of women remained utterly unfathomable to him. Later that day, at the third outpost guest house, Chun Yowon was speaking with the second elder, Yin Moha. Yin Moha reported that she had secured all the medicinal ingredients requested by the divine physician. Yowon expressed his gratitude. Before leaving for the Dragon Tiger Claw, Yowon had informed the divine physician about the former cult leader's symptoms without revealing his identity. Using nano scanning results, he had explained every abnormality he detected within Chun Yuzhong's body. After hearing this, the divine physician concluded that the cause was likely damage to the major artery connected to the heart. Yowon had already stored extensive information about medicinal herbs within NANO while researching the components of opium. Based on the prescription given by the divine physician, he had instructed Yin Moha to acquire any missing medicinal ingredients. Yin Moha admitted that she had never imagined so many events would unfold during her absence. Yowon reassured her that everything had ultimately turned out for the better and told her not to worry. Yin Moha bowed respectfully and congratulated Yowon, acknowledging that he had now entered the ranks of the 5 great martial artists. Yowon accepted the congratulations with a smile. Internally, Yowon noted that with all the medicinal herbs now gathered, only the matter involving the divine physician remained unresolved. The journey had taken longer than expected, and he knew he needed to return to the cult without delay. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. Yowon permitted the visitor to enter. A young man dressed in black stepped inside and knelt on one knee in respect. When Yowon questioned his identity, the man revealed that he was delivering an urgent message from Elder Huan. Yowon immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. The man was an agent from the covert operations unit led by Huan Yi, and such agents only appeared in critical circumstances. After receiving the message through telepathy, Yowon's expression darkened. He concluded that they had to return immediately. The report concerned unexpected guests moving toward the Mountain of 10,000. That same afternoon, Yowon ordered preparations for an immediate return to the demonic cult, although they had originally planned to hold a funeral for Gamrosu's granddaughter. Before departing, circumstances left them no choice but to hurry. Yowon promised that a grand funeral ceremony would be held within the cult itself, and personally persuaded Gamrosu to leave at once. The coffin was placed onto the carriage, with Gamrosu remaining close beside it while holding the baby tightly in her arms. With all preparations complete, it was finally time to depart. Moonku asked about Yowon, noting that he had gone to meet Junwang along with Elder Yin and Elder Young. Concern stirred within her as she recalled Junwang mentioning marriage in relation to Lady Wang, and she wondered if that was what they were discussing. Ho Sangwa noticed Moonku's distracted state and asked if she was alright. Moonku snapped out of her thoughts, reassured her that she was fine, and thanked her for the concern. Inwardly, Moonku told herself not to overthink it and resolved to trust Yowon as she always had, reminding herself that he was the only person she loved. Unexpected events unfolded when Yowon arrived at the medical room. Yin Moha and Young Danhwa were left utterly stunned, their shock evident as Junwang, Bunwang, and Wang Yogun all knelt down together and formally requested to join the demonic cult. Yowon frowned at the sight, addressing Junwang, who earnestly pleaded for their acceptance so they could repay him for saving Yogun's life. Young Danhwa observed the situation inwardly, noting that he had intended to push the issue of marriage involving Lady Wang anyway, but the entire family willingly joining the cult was an even better outcome. Yowon reflected silently, realizing how unexpected this turn of events was. Junwang had spoken of marriage after the duel, yet within an hour, his stance had completely changed. Yowon suspected that the decision had come from Yogun herself. That suspicion was confirmed when Junwang sent Yowon a telepathic message, suggesting that marriage could be discussed in the future and that it would be better for Yowon and Yogun to get to know each other first. This made it clear that the choice had indeed been Yogun's. Yowon admitted inwardly that he had not anticipated this. Although Yogun was undeniably beautiful, Yowon had never been interested in other women and had felt no particular change before. Now, however, he found himself curious about her, sensing that she was different from others in a way similar to Moonku. Yowon accepted their request, stating that if the unrivaled sword Junwang wished to enter his cult, there was no reason for him to refuse. He welcomed them. Junwang's expression brightened immediately, and he expressed his gratitude for being accepted. Young Danhwa congratulated Yowon, acknowledging the significance of having the unrivaled unrivaled sword joined the cult. Yin Moha realized inwardly just how momentous this was. The addition of Junwang was enough to disrupt the long-standing balance between the orthodox and unorthodox factions. A few days later, at a midway point along the road to the heavenly demon divine cult, Yowon traveled with his followers. During the journey, the agent from the Darkness sect reappeared and delivered a telepathic report stating that the approaching group would reach the main cult location within 2 days. Yowon repeated the estimate to himself, then asked Danhwa how much longer their own journey would take. Danhwa replied that even if they hurried, it would still require at least 3 more days. Realizing the gap, Yowon concluded that there was no other choice. He decided to proceed alone ahead of everyone else. Hobum reacted in alarm, sensing that something serious had occurred. Yowon answered with a grim expression, explaining that uninvited guests were heading toward the cult. Yin Moha immediately offered to accompany him along with Elder Yang, but Yowon refused. He ordered everyone to continue returning to the cult as planned, emphasizing that it would be far faster for him to travel alone. The moment he finished speaking, Yowon leapt forward and vanished within seconds. Hobum was left wondering what kind of guests could force the Demon Lord to act with such urgency. Yin Moha admitted she was unsure, but inwardly she felt uneasy. Publicly, the Demon Lord was supposed to be in seclusion. If guests important enough to require his presence were arriving despite that, the situation could only mean something serious. 2 days later, near the 10,000 Great Mountains, Yowon raced through the forest at terrifying speed. He judged that he would soon reach the main cult and acknowledged that running non-stop for 2 days without rest had been worth it. Urging himself to move faster, he accelerated even more. When he was roughly 10 miles from the castle, the sound of horse hooves and faint tremors carried through the ground. Yowon shifted his direction and observed a long procession of soldiers advancing in formation. He paused atop a tall tree and surveyed them from above. At the center of the formation was an extravagant golden carriage. The banner held at the front bore the unmistakable seal of the Imperial Palace. Yowon immediately understood their origin. Thousands of soldiers guarded the procession, numbering over 3,000 in total. What drew Yowon's attention was that many of them possessed martial training, despite the long-standing understanding that the government did not interfere with Morim affairs. Around 300 soldiers clad in orange armor surrounded the golden carriage directly. Their levels ranged from top class to master-level warriors. Leading them was a man riding a horse whose presence far surpassed that of his subordinates. His cultivation had reached the evolutionary realm. Beside him was another figure whose strength hovered around the supreme peak. Compared to them, the soldiers behind, mostly first-rate and early peak warriors, were on an entirely different level. Yowon activated NANO's zoom function and focused on the 2 leading figures. The man at the front possessed a dignified bearing and sharp features, clearly someone of high authority, likely a general of considerable rank. What unsettled Yowon more, however, was the man beside him. His aura felt strange, as though he did not belong to the military at all. Instead, he carried the impression of someone born into wealth and privilege. Yowon then turned his attention to the carriage itself. He sensed only one presence inside. That person had no martial energy whatsoever, yet was guarded by an overwhelming force. Yowon decided that the truth would soon reveal itself. After memorizing what he had seen, he resumed his journey, veering south to reach the castle ahead of them and prepare accordingly. At the same time, near the northern gate of the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult's castle, cultists hurriedly made preparations to receive the delegation from the Imperial Palace. Huan Yi, the 7th Elder, stared toward the north with a troubled expression, wondering whether the Demon Lord had arrived yet. Moments later, a figure ascended from below. It was the Great Guardian Markham, recognizable by his distinctive engraved mask. Markham asked whether the Demon Lord had arrived yet, and Huan Yi shook his head, stating that he had not, and that the Imperial Army would soon reach the gates, making the situation dangerous. Markham shared the concern and turned his gaze northward. At that moment, something entered his field of vision, a tiny dot racing toward them at an unbelievable speed. The movement was so fast that, at first glance, it could easily be mistaken for leaves carried by the wind. Markham warned that they needed to prepare the defensive formation. Huan Yi questioned the urgency, unable to understand the reason. Markham directed his attention toward the incoming dot. By then, it had drawn close enough to reveal the outline of a human figure. Huan Yi struggled to perceive it at first. Only by concentrating intensely was he able to catch faint traces of its movement. The speed was so extreme that it was nearly impossible to see without full focus, leaving him stunned and confused about what kind of being could move like that. Markham insisted that the defense formation be activated immediately. As Huan Yi prepared to order the guards to raise the alarm, Markham suddenly recognized the figure and urgently stopped him. Through telepathy, Markham informed him that the incoming presence was their lord. Huan Yi was shocked and sought confirmation, but it was already clear. The figure approaching at terrifying speed was Yowon himself. Huan Yi worried that approaching from the main gate would expose Yowon, given the wide open space before it. Before that concern could settle, something entirely unexpected occurred. At the edge of the forest, Yowon leapt onto the final tree before the open ground. Markham and Huan Yi watched in shock as Yowon vaulted even higher, soaring above the height of the castle wall itself. He stepped through the air as though it were solid ground, crossing over the wall effortlessly. The sight left both of them nearly screaming in disbelief. They realized that Yowon was walking through the air. This was a legendary realm of stepping techniques, a level said to rival the mythical state of air sword flight, something martial artists across Morim could only dream of achieving. The realization struck them both that the Demon Lord had ascended to an even higher realm, one that surpassed even Markham's own capabilities. Yowon drew out the white dragon blade, hurled it upward and stepped onto it, riding it through the sky. Flying at more than twice the height of the castle wall, he crossed over unnoticed and disappeared into the inner palace. Left utterly dumbfounded, Huan Yi sent a telepathic message, wondering what in the world could have happened outside the walls. Markham, equally stunned, admitted that he wanted to know the same. Markham and Huan Yi hurried after Yowon into the inner palace. Yowon was already waiting for them, having clearly sensed their pursuit. They greeted him formally, pledging their service as Great Guardian and Seventh Elder. Yowon asked whether everything had remained stable during his absence. They assured him that nothing was amiss, though they urged haste as time was short. Yowon acknowledged this, and they immediately escorted him to change into formal attire suitable for receiving an important guest. The remaining elders within the palace were already properly dressed, having long prepared for this moment. When Yowon entered the main hall, everyone rose from their seats and bowed in unison, proclaiming their loyalty to the demonic cult. The third elder, Mun Yun, who currently held the highest authority among the elders, stepped forward to formally welcome him. Yowon expressed his appreciation for how the cult had been managed during his secluded training. He then informed them that envoys from the Imperial Palace were arriving and ordered the remaining elders and the Six Swords troop to accompany him to the northern gate. The command was acknowledged immediately. Outside, the sect leaders were already lined up in formation, standing ready. The sound of hundreds of horses striking the ground sent faint tremors through the earth. Moments later, the Imperial army emerged from the forest. A man clad in orange armor advanced from the front of the formation. Markham immediately sensed that the man had reached the evolutionary realm. The commander surveyed Yowon and the cultists with open arrogance before announcing his identity as the southern commander, Yon Namgun, acting in the name of the Great Ming. Huan Yi quickly sent a telepathic message to Yowon, informing him that the man belonged to the Imperial Guards. These guards answered directly to the Emperor and were led by the Supreme Commander, with the northern and southern commanders acting beneath him, figures of immense authority within the Imperial Palace. Though Yowon had not known it, both commanders were renowned even within Morim for their power. Yowon turned his attention to the golden carriage and wondered who could possibly be inside to warrant the personal appearance of such a high-ranking general. The carriage began to move, signaling that its occupant was stepping out. As the door opened, the individual inside revealed himself and carefully brought out a scroll wrapped in red silk and embroidered with golden dragons. The sight drew puzzled looks from the cultists. Enraged by their unmoving posture, Yon Namgun demanded that they kneel and receive the Emperor's order. No one moved. The cultists, who moments ago had been formally welcoming, turned cold and grim. Namgun ground his teeth in frustration, realizing inwardly that while he had not expected the demonic cult to kneel easily, he had also not anticipated such an icy and unyielding response from them. As he prepared to shout again, a telepathic message reached him, ordering him to stop and acknowledging that he would not be sufficient. The message came from Ju Taehyun. Taehyun stepped forward a few paces and announced himself loudly before the cultists, declaring that he was Prince Chen, acting under the direct command of the Emperor of the Great Ming Empire. Shock rippled through the assembled cultists as they whispered his name in disbelief, realizing that he was indeed the Emperor's son. Huan Yi observed the scene with grim clarity. Given the elite nature of the escort, he had expected someone of immense importance, but for it to truly be a prince exceeded even his expectations. Taehyun's rage erupted. He shouted that their behavior was unforgivable, condemning them for remaining standing despite the Imperial command being present, and for daring to keep their heads raised before a prince of the empire. His fury escalated as he pointed directly at Yowon and demanded to know whether he was the demon lord of the demonic cult. Inwardly, Taehyun sneered. Yowon looked far too young, little little more than a boy in his eyes. Taehyun sensed no aura from him at all, and concluded that he was nothing more than an ordinary man with no martial prowess. Mockery dripped from Taehyun's words as he insulted both Yowon and his followers, claiming that a leader's conduct reflected upon his subordinates. He ordered Yowon to step forward and kneel to receive the Emperor's decree. That final command ignited the fury of the cultists. Outrage surged through them as they felt their lord had been openly insulted. One by one, they released their internal energy, and an overwhelming pressure flooded the area. The horses of the Imperial Army panicked, rearing and neighing as they struggled to break formation. The southern commander reacted instantly, drawing his sword and accusing the demonic cult of treason for daring to display hostility toward a prince bearing the Emperor's authority. Taehyun sneered inwardly, confident that no matter how fierce they appeared, the demonic cult could never stand against the Empire's vast armies. At that moment, Munyun stepped forward from behind Yowon and knelt on one knee before him. He respectfully asked for permission to speak, admitting that he was unsure whether the prince was reasonable, but wishing to attempt dialogue regardless. Yowon silently raised his hand in approval. Munyun rose and walked straight toward Prince Taehyun. Taehyun scoffed inwardly, seeing this as further proof that the Demon Lord himself was useless and unwilling to step forward. With his fist pressed to his palm, Munyun addressed the prince formally, stating that it was an honor to stand before His Imperial Highness Ju Taehyun. The Imperial Guard standing beside Taehyun erupted in anger and moved to shout an order, but the moment Munyun's energy pressed down on him, pain racked his body and forced his words to die in his throat. Munyun ignored him completely and calmly declared that the members of the Heavenly Demon Divine cult knelt to no one except the Demon Lord, whom they regarded as their very heaven. Taehyun glared at Munyun with seething fury, but Munyun continued without hesitation. He stated that the cult and the Great Ming Empire were bound by a mutual non-aggression treaty and stood as equals, neither subordinate nor related. He reminded them that the first emperor of the Great Ming had received aid from their cult when founding the empire, and that it was then the treaty had been signed. On that basis, he questioned why kneeling was being demanded now. Taehyun exploded in rage and accused Munyun of insolence, ordering the guards to force him to his knees. 3 Imperial guards immediately drew their swords and charged. Munyun's gaze sharpened as he concluded that they had brought this upon themselves. His movement was swift and precise. Sword chi flared outward, and in a single strike, all 3 blades shattered into pieces. Namgun roared in fury, threatening the guards with death if they failed. The guards trembled, trapped between Munyun's overwhelming presence and Namgun's murderous pressure. Munyun advanced without pause, striking them all at once. He sealed their blood points cleanly and dropped them to the ground, incapacitated. Taehyun reeled inwardly in disbelief. The royal guards had trained in the martial arts of the imperial family, yet they had been defeated with humiliating ease. Driven by fury, Taehyun ordered a full assault. The guards rushed forward together, but before they could even reach Munyun, limbs were severed and blood sprayed violently through the air. Wang Hul stamped down on a fallen guard and glared coldly at the rest, daring anyone else to step forward. The remaining guards panicked, shouting accusations of treason as they hurriedly raised their shields and formed a defensive barrier around the prince. Taehyun, however, smiled inwardly, pleased that matters were escalating further. That satisfaction shattered when a shadow fell over him. Yowon's presence emerged silently, his voice cold and emotionless as he addressed Taehyun's apparent enjoyment. Taehyun was struck by shock, unable to comprehend how Yowon had passed through the guards. In blind rage, he swung his arm, but the motion never completed. Yowon severed Taehyun's hand cleanly at the wrist. Taehyun screamed as agony consumed him. He accused Yowon of treason, but before the words could settle, Yowon gathered blade chi into his hand and cut down Taehyun's remaining arm from the shoulder. Taehyun collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain as blood gushed from both wounds and soaked into the earth beneath him. Yowon then bent down and lifted Taehyun's bloated body effortlessly with one hand. The guards stared in shock, stunned not only by the brutality, but by the terrifying strength displayed so casually before them. Taehyun stammered in panic, demanding whether Yowon understood what he was doing and warning that this act would make an enemy of the imperial authority. Yowon cut him off without hesitation, coldly remarking that Taehyun spoke far too much for someone claiming to represent the empire. A scream tore from Taehyun as Yowon hurled him violently toward the gate where the cultists were gathered. His his body flew past the Imperial guards and crashed into the midst of the demonic cult's warriors. Taehyun raged and screamed in humiliation and fury, shouting that Yowon dared to treat him this way and threatening that Yowon would not escape consequences for harming him. Yowon glared down at him with a cruel smile, dismissing his threats and questioning whether Taehyun truly believed such hollow intimidation would work on them. At Yowon's words, the man froze in shock, unable to comprehend how Yowon had seen through him. 3 days earlier, before the Imperial forces reached the demonic cult's castle, a voice had called out to the person inside the golden carriage. The southern commander had responded respectfully, slowing his horse to ride alongside the carriage. From within, the real Taehyun had spoken with clear authority. Taehyun had questioned whose land they were traveling through. Yeon Namgun had answered that it belonged to His Majesty, the Emperor of the Great Ming Empire. Taehyun had then asked who resided on that land, and Yeon Namgun had replied that it was the Emperor's subjects and the civilians of the Great Ming Empire. Taehyun had grown increasingly dissatisfied, questioning why martial artists dared to look down on the Great Ming Empire. He could not understand why. When an imperial command was issued, those people did not rush forward to kneel, but instead forced the imperial family to go to them. Inwardly, Taehyun had resented the old tradition, unable to accept why the founding emperor, despite having once received help from such people, had allowed such customs to persist. The mutual non-aggression treaty between the Murim and the empire had been formed roughly 180 years earlier. It was signed by the founding emperor of the Great Ming Empire and the leaders of the three great forces of Murim. Martial artists, who possessed overwhelming and incomparable strength, had once been regarded as a grave threat to imperial authority. There had been emperors who chose to wage war against Murim, but the founding emperor of the Ming Empire judged such conflicts to be a reckless waste of national power. Instead, he chose to establish a mutual non-aggression pact, ensuring balance rather than endless bloodshed. Taehyun harbored deep resentment toward the demonic cult. In his view, the emperor alone should be regarded as heaven, yet these people dared to revere their cult leader as such. To him, this made them no different from the orthodox martial artists he already despised. Namgun observed that Taehyun's hatred was likely intensified by the fact that he had learned both the martial arts of the imperial family and Taoist techniques. Namgun calmly remarked that the unorthodox faction and the demonic cult held values fundamentally different from those of the orthodox faction. Taehyun erupted in anger, dismissing such distinctions as absurd. He argued that differing views were irrelevant and questioned whether only the orthodox faction could be considered part of the Great Ming Empire within Murim. Namgun acknowledged his words without further argument. Taehyun declared that he could no longer tolerate the situation. Taehyun then called for Yukong and asked for his thoughts. Yukong, who had been pretending to be Taehyun in public, was in reality a low-ranking civil official of the Great Ming Empire. Drawing on information from his informants, he reported that the current cult leader had seized his position by driving out the former one. Taehyun reacted with interest. Yukong continued, stating that he had heard the current leader was largely powerless and had removed capable individuals from their posts. He suggested that if Taehyun intervened and set the cult's affairs straight, he would earn the emperor's trust and secure a stronger position for himself within the empire. Taehyun found the proposal intriguing and urged Yukong to continue. Throughout their discussion, Namgun remained silent. Even then, he sensed that this course of action could lead to disaster. Now, 3 days later, watching the chaos unfold, he knew his instincts had been correct. As Namgun observed the situation deteriorating, he reflected bitterly that Taehyun had claimed all they needed to do was display the dignity of the empire. Instead, he had created far greater trouble than anticipated. Most concerning of all was Yowon himself. The authority of the imperial family held no power over him, and Namgun realized that he could not allow Taehyun anywhere near the demon lord. Yeon Namgun issued the command to arrest Yowon at once. The Imperial guards rushed forward with drawn swords, but Yowon vanished instantly, leaving only a faint trace behind. The guards, trained in martial arts, immediately recognized the phenomenon and shouted in alarm as they realized he had disappeared using a mirror image technique. While they searched frantically, Yowon was already standing directly in front of Southern Commander Yeon Namgun. The guards attempted to charge again, but three figures appeared in an instant and blocked their path. Great Guardian Markham stepped forward alongside the left guardian Li Ha-meng and the right guardian Sub-meng. Li Ha-meng calmly drew a line across the ground with his distinctive red sword and warned that crossing it would cost at least an arm. The guards froze in terror, unable to move. Never before had they felt such overwhelming murderous intent pressing down on them. Yeon Namgun realized inwardly that the situation had turned disastrous. The demonic cult had completely surrounded them with drawn weapons. Yowon walked straight toward Yeon Namgun and the Imperial guards. With his fist pressed to his palm, he bowed lightly and remarked that Taehyun looked fitting in that armor. Taehyun was struck speechless. He had hidden among the guards after using a decoy, yet Yeowon had identified him without hesitation. The realization that Yeowon might have known all along left him stunned. Yeon Namgun stepped forward defensively, placing himself in front of Taehyun with a tense expression. Yeon Namgun shouted in alarm that even with a non-aggression treaty between Morim and the royal family, Yeowon had no right to harm officials or threaten a prince of the empire. Submeng laughed mockingly and pointed out that it was the Imperial side who had provoked the conflict in the first place. Yeon Namgun faltered, fully aware that Submeng was correct. Still, he knew that yielding to force would shatter the authority of the royal family and undermine the non-aggression pact itself. As the southern military general, he could not allow that to happen. Yeon Namgun raised his voice again, declaring that even so, there was no justification for harming an official of the Great Ming Empire. He insisted that the conflict had been caused by Yukong alone and did not represent the will of the empire. Yeowon scoffed and stated that he would ask Taehyun directly. He explained that within the Heavenly Demon Divine cult, anyone who impersonated him would be executed immediately. He then questioned how the royal family dealt with those who impersonated a prince. Taehyun frowned, unable to respond. Yeowon calmly stated that if not for the non-aggression pact, Taehyun would already be dead. Taehyun fell into deep thought. Yeowon was right. The Great Ming Empire executed those who impersonated members of the royal family and often wiped out their entire families as well. It became clear to him that Yeowon was not only terrifying in martial strength, but also razor-sharp in judgment. Yeon Namgun finally spoke, acknowledging that such behavior was indeed unacceptable toward the royal family. He demanded that Yeowon step away from Taehyun immediately. As he spoke, Yeon Namgun raised his sword toward Yeowon. In that instant, Great Guardian Markim moved. He charged forward and struck Yeon Namgun's blade aside. Yeon Namgun poured most of his energy into resisting the blow, yet the force behind Markim's strike vastly exceeded his expectations. Stunned by the overwhelming power, Yeon Namgun's arm was flung upward. He attempted to counter by lifting his left leg to strike Markim's neck, but Markim calmly tilted his head back and drove his finger into a blood point on Yeon Namgun's leg. A scream tore from Yeon Namgun as sword chi pierced through his thigh. As he tried to regain his footing by pulling his leg back, Markim kicked the supporting leg out from under him. Yeon Namgun crashed to the ground, his sword slipping from his grasp. Markim reached out and the fallen sword flew into his hand. He leveled the blade at Namgun's neck and issued a cold warning, telling him never to point his sword at their lord again. The moment Yeon Namgun fell, panic spread through the remaining Imperial guards. Their commander was down and none of them dared step forward against Yeowon and his guardians. Taehyun was left with nothing but his words. He knew he could not win through force, so after a brief pause, he shouted defiantly, questioning whether Yeowon truly dared threaten the Imperial army. He invoked the might of the Great Ming Empire and its millions of soldiers, believing that no martial artist could withstand such overwhelming numbers. Yeowon regarded him calmly and remarked that Taehyun was bold. Taehyun gathered himself and issued a final threat, declaring that if Yeowon harmed him in any way, the demonic cult would be erased from existence. Yet the reaction he expected never came. The cultists simply stared at him with cold, indifferent eyes. Unease crept into Taehyun's heart as he failed to understand their lack of fear. Yeowon spoke again, stating that excessive bravery often turned into recklessness. He admitted that he had been cautious because Taehyun was the first member of the royal family he had encountered, but expressed clear disappointment. Taehyun stuttered as he questioned what he meant. Yeowon scoffed at the mention of 1,000,000 soldiers and slowly raised his left hand. In an instant, chaos erupted among the Imperial guards. Their weapons began to writhe violently, tearing against their grips as if alive. Shouts of confusion and terror rang out as swords and spears struggled to escape their hands. The guards desperately poured internal energy into restraining them, but their efforts were meaningless against the overwhelming force acting upon the weapons. One by one, more than 200 weapons were ripped free, floating into the air before turning back toward their owners. Blades aimed directly at them. The sight shattered what remained of the guards' composure. Cries of disbelief and terror filled the air as they realized what they were witnessing. Those trained in martial arts recognized it immediately. This was air sword control. Even Markim, who had already witnessed Yeowon's growth, was shaken. He realized that his earlier assumptions had been correct. Yeowon had truly reached the mystic realm, and he had done so in an impossibly short span of time. Among the cultists, awe spread like wildfire Empire. Yowon's presence reminded them of Chun Ma, the heavenly demon himself, as if the legend had descended once more upon the world. While the Imperial Guard stood frozen, threatened by their own weapons, Yowon advanced slowly toward Taehyun. Terror completely overtook Taehyun. He stumbled backward, tripped, and collapsed onto the ground. All traces of authority and dignity vanished as he stared up at Yowon in sheer fear. When Yowon made a simple grasping motion with his right hand, Taehyun's body was lifted helplessly into the air. Taehyun cried out in panic, unable to control his own body. Yowon then spoke coldly, asking whether Taehyun truly believed the non-aggression treaty existed because the heavenly demon divine cult feared the Empire's millions of soldiers. He declared that such an assumption was utterly wrong. Yowon stated that the true reason the mutual non-aggression treaty existed was because the Emperor had feared them. Taehyun tried to shout back in outrage, unable to accept the idea that the founding Emperor of the Great Ming could ever fear anyone. Before he could finish, Yowon sent his body even higher into the air, cutting his protest short. Yowon calmly explained that an army only moved by the Emperor's command, then posed a chilling question. What would happen if that Emperor no longer existed? Taehyun was struck dumb by the implication. He realized that Yowon was openly suggesting the assassination of the Emperor himself. Terror seized him as his body continued to rise, robbing him of the courage to even speak. Yowon continued, describing how a warrior like himself could infiltrate the palace in the dead of night. Taehyun remembered how effortlessly Yowon and the cult's warriors had pierced the Imperial Guard's defenses. The thought that the royal family could be wiped out made his blood run cold. Yowon then asked whose orders a million-strong army would follow once the entire royal family was gone. For the first time in his life, Taehyun felt genuine fear of death. Yowon's cold gaze and unwavering tone made it clear that this was not an empty threat. He understood that Yowon truly meant every word. Yowon asked whether he now understood why the pact had been formed in the first place. As Yowon withdrew the overwhelming pressure back into himself, Taehyun nodded frantically in agreement. His body was gently lowered back to the ground, where he collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath and drenched in cold sweat. Yowon acknowledged inwardly that fear alone was not the only reason the Imperial Palace still stood. Rumors spoke of hidden powers guarding the Emperor, forces that only someone on Yowon's level could challenge. But there was no need to reveal such truths to Taehyun or the Imperial Guards. With a simple motion of Yowon's hand, all the air-controlled weapons fell harmlessly to the ground. Calm returned to the area. Yowon then decided it was time to hear the Emperor's actual message. He extended his hand toward the fallen scroll near the carriage, and it flew obediently into his grasp. As he untied the golden cord and began to open it, a scream echoed through the area. Yowon turned toward the sound and saw Yukong writhing in terror as demonic cult warriors closed in on him. Yukong shouted desperately, declaring himself an Imperial official and begging them not to approach. His protest meant nothing as he stumbled backwards, surrounded on all sides. Realizing death was imminent, despair overwhelmed him. At that moment, a man stepped forward with a chilling expression. It was Muk Yen of the Illusionary Sword Sect. Though he admitted he wished to tear Yukong apart, he chose to spare his life for the moment. Muk Yen tore a strip of cloth from Yukong's robe, bound his shoulder and arm to stop the bleeding, and sealed his blood points, preventing any use of internal energy. Yukong lacked the resolve to take his own life. Survival, even as a slave, felt preferable to death. But before he could find relief in that thought, something went terribly wrong. A freezing sensation spread through his body. In the next instant, he felt unbearable agony, as if something were piercing directly into his internal organs. A scream tore from his throat as the pain consumed him completely. Sect leaders rushed forward and immediately noticed black blood seeping from Yukong's ears and other openings. The blood emitted a foul stench, hissing and smoking the moment it touched the ground. Realization struck them all at once. It was poison. Alarm spread instantly, and the sect leaders retreated without hesitation, confirming that Yukong had indeed been poisoned. Yukong convulsed violently and vomited a massive amount of blood. The poison rapidly spread throughout his body, consuming him from within. At that moment, Yowon moved toward him. Several sect leaders cried out in warning, alarmed by the danger as poison visibly leaked from Yukong's body. Despite their attempts to stop him, Yowon reached out without hesitation. Yowon focused on Yukong's condition, feeling the faint beating of his heart as it steadily slowed. When the poison made contact with Yowon's skin, it instantly evaporated without effect. The sight left the sect leaders stunned. The poison had no effect on him at all. Realization dawned upon them that Yowon had reached a realm where even deadly poisons could not harm him. Yoan questioned what had been done to Yukong, and Muk Yen explained that he had sealed Yukong's blood points to prevent the use of internal energy, and that Yukong had been poisoned afterward. Yoan frowned upon hearing this. With the flow of internal energy halted, the poison would have spread instantly. This method clearly existed to ensure Yukong could not reveal anything. There was no longer any way to save him. Yoan instead turned his attention to uncovering Yukong's identity. He examined the body carefully and identified traces of Bichu art. The physique Yukong carried was a result of this cultivation method. The art, derived from Sorem, was infamous for forcing practitioners to gain weight and sacrifice speed, making it widely known but rarely practiced. Yoan realized inwardly that this suggested Yukong was connected to the Orthodox faction. That raised a troubling question. Why would the Orthodox faction seek to provoke conflict between the Imperial family and the demonic cult? To find the truth, Yoan instructed NANO to begin scanning. NANO initiated a detailed internal analysis, and augmented reality overlays appeared before Yoan's eyes as faint red light shone from his hand. Yoan began with Yukong's head. As he touched it, something abnormal appeared in the scan, a small creature writhing inside the skull. Its movements were weak, slowing as Yukong's life faded. Yoan immediately recognized it as a centipede. Before anything further could be done, the centipede suddenly burst apart. Blood exploded outward. Yukong's head collapsed, and his life finally ended. The method was identical to what Yoan had seen before in Li Bake. Yoan realized that this technique matched the work of the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. The implication that his influence had reached even the Imperial family was deeply unsettling. Yoan began to suspect that the Imperial Order itself might be connected to that shadowy hand. With that thought, Yoan turned his attention back to the Imperial Order and opened the scroll. The moment it was unfurled, all Imperial guards and soldiers immediately dropped to their knees and bowed in absolute obedience. Only Yoan and the members of the Heavenly Demon Divine cult remained standing. Commander Yon Namgun, forced to kneel with the others, ground his teeth in frustration as he stared at the unmoving cultists. Yoan read through the contents of the scroll. It contained a formal request inviting several honored guests, including the leaders of Morim, to attend the signing ceremony of a renewed non-aggression treaty with the Crown Prince. The proposed date coincided with the Dano festival, which immediately raised Yoan's suspicions about how such an arrangement had come to be. Yoan then appeared before Taehyun once more, startling him. He showed him the scroll and asked whether he truly understood its contents. The prince admitted that while he did not know every detail, he understood the general intent. Yoan pressed further and asked who else had received these invitations. After a brief hesitation, Taehyun admitted that the invitations had been sent to all faction leaders. Yoan sought clarification, questioning whether this meant only the three great factions. Inwardly, his thoughts sharpened. Throughout Morim's long history, the Great Three forces had gathered in one place only a handful of times, and nearly all of those occasions had been during periods of large-scale war. The possibility that someone was deliberately engineering another conflict could not be ignored. Taehyun then revealed an unexpected truth. In addition to the demonic cult, the Orthodox Morim Alliance, and the Unorthodox Alliance, there was a fourth faction involved. He identified it as a rapidly rising power known as the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. The revelation struck Yoan instantly. Everything connected. At the same moment, far away in a dark stone chamber beneath Yellow Mountain near Jerkin Castle, shrill, distorted screams echoed through the room. A red centipede writhed violently inside a red wooden box resting atop a table. A man shrouded in shadow watched silently as the creature convulsed, then suddenly exploded. The man calmly closed the box and muttered that the demonic cult was involved yet again. This time, there was no need to retrieve the centipede. The spy had been designed to die the moment it encountered a serious threat. Poison had ensured its silence. The man believed there was no way the demonic cult could uncover the truth behind their schemes. The second grand plan had failed, and with it, the long-planted spies had been lost. Still, he took comfort in the fact that no trace should have remained behind. At least, that was what he believed. The locations of the various factions across Morim were widely scattered, so the Imperial messengers arrived at different destinations over the span of nearly 2 weeks. In Henan Province, Loyang County, within the main temple of the Orthodox Morim Alliance, a grand feast was underway. Elegant music filled the hall as beautiful dancers moved gracefully before the guests. Li Mok, the head of the Orthodox Morim Alliance, bowed deeply as he presented a ceremonial cup. He respectfully offered it to the Empire's most honored guest, asking him to accept a cup blessed by the gods. close. The recipient was Ju Taehyun, the eldest son of the Emperor of the Daemyeong Empire, and the one known as the Soul King. He laughed heartily, clearly enjoying himself, and expressed his delight at the lavish hospitality being shown to him. Outside the hall where the feast continued unabated, Jigel Sohee spoke quietly with the monk Poon Chung-won. Poon Chung-won expressed concern, noting that despite the spy problem remaining unresolved, the alliance had already spent 4 consecutive days indulging in banquets. He worried whether such behavior was truly appropriate under the circumstances. Jigel Sohee agreed that the concern was valid, but she reasoned that being viewed favorably by the Soul King, who was destined to become the next emperor, could only benefit the Orthodox alliance, especially given the current unstable situation. She reflected on her recent experiences, recalling that it had only been a few months since her visit to the demonic cult. In that short time, numerous hidden spies had already been uncovered. Even so, the true number of spies still lurking within the Nine sects remained unknown. She questioned how long the infiltration must have been ongoing for so many spies to exist, and considered the possibility that the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect had been operating in Morim for far longer than anyone realized. Poon Chung-won then admitted that he had grown suspicious of the invitation to renew the non-aggression pact. He could not shake the feeling that the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect was somehow involved. Jigel Sohee nodded in agreement. In truth, this suspicion was already shared by most of Morim's leaders. She added that while she could not be certain about the unorthodox alliance, she believed the current demonic cult would see through the trap being laid. Poon Chung-won asked what made her so confident. Jigel Sohee recalled the young demon lord they had encountered before. Poon Chung-won agreed, remembering how overwhelming and frightening Yo-won had been. Not long after that incident, he had risen to power within the demonic cult, a fact that only deepened his sense of awe and unease. Jigel Sohee reasoned that if she were in Yo-won's position, she would exploit a trap like this rather than avoid it. From what she had seen of him, she was certain that Chun Yo-won possessed the insight to recognize the scheme. Poon Chung-won wondered aloud whether that meant the Demon Lord would attend the gathering in person. Jigel Sohee answered confidently that he would. Based on her understanding of Yo-won, there was no chance he would let such an opportunity pass him by. At that moment, a calm voice spoke from behind them, remarking that this was good news indeed. Jigel Sohee was startled and turned around. Standing there was Yeon Buso, dressed in white robes. He appeared to be in his early 30s. He was Jigel Sohee's fiancé and the eldest son of the Orthodox Morim alliance. Poon Chung-won was shaken inwardly. He had failed to sense Yeon Buso's approach at all. It was clear that Yeon Buso's martial arts had advanced yet again. The 7 masters of the Orthodox alliance had devoted everything to nurturing him as the future leader, and witnessing his rapid growth made Poon Chung-won wonder who in Morim would be able to stand against him one day. Yet he also felt that the heavens were fair. At the same time that they had raised Yeon Buso, the heavens had produced another figure, a man from the demonic cult, its current demon lord, a man who might one day become Yeon Buso's true rival. Jigel Sohee greeted Yeon Buso, asking what he meant. Yeon Buso explained that this was an opportunity to observe the man whom Master Poon, Master Muyong, and Jigel Sohee herself, who had once been sent as envoys, had all praised so highly. Jigel Sohee admitted that she had not realized Yeon Buso wished to meet him. Yeon Buso stated calmly that this was because the man in question was someone who would walk alongside him into the next generation. Time passed after the special Imperial envoy visited the heavenly demon divine cult. The Sage King, Ju Taehyun, who had initially been terrified of the demonic cult, hurried to conclude official matters and attempted to withdraw. However, following Chun Yo-won's guidance, he ended up remaining within the cult instead. Contrary to his expectations of fear and tension, the heavenly demon divine cult treated the Sage King with great hospitality. Although it was difficult for him to adjust to their attitude at first, several days later he found himself increasingly at ease, disarmed by their consistent courtesy. While staying in his assigned quarters, the Sage King fell into deep thought. He reflected that the atmosphere was not bad at all. Traditionally, aside from the Orthodox Morim alliance, the other 2 great forces had always sent proxies to treaty ceremonies in order to preserve appearances. If the Demon Lord himself were to participate this time, the Emperor's prestige would rise significantly. The Emperor had always emphasized that diplomacy itself was a form of skill. If circumstances shifted because of this event, Taehyun believed that his own position, currently inferior to that of the Soul King, could rise as well. Later that night, the Southern military general Yeon Namgun arrived to see him. Taehyun permitted him to enter. Namgun apologized for the late visit and was invited to sit. Taehyun then raised the matter that weighed on his mind, wondering whether if everything proceeded smoothly, the leader of the divine cult would truly participate in the treaty ceremony. Namgun paused at the question, surveyed the surroundings, and then released his energy. A barrier formed around the room, allowing them to speak freely without fear of being overheard. Taehyun was impressed, noting that Namgun understood his intentions well. He reasoned that the generous treatment he was receiving must indicate that the cult was favorably inclined toward the Empire. Still, he could not yet discern the Demon Lord's true intentions. He acknowledged that it would be ideal if Yowon were to give a clear and definitive answer. What neither of them realized was that someone else was listening from above the ceiling, someone even Namgun could not sense. That person was Hwan Yi. At the same time, within the Inner Palace's medical room, the demonic doctor Baek Jongwoo and several other physicians observed Gam Rosu closely as she continued her treatment with utmost care. The bald, pale man lying on the bed was the former lord, Chun Yu-jong. Baek Jongwoo carefully observed Gamrosu as she continued the treatment. She had been administering acupuncture for over an hour without pause, and Jongwoo could clearly see that her techniques surpassed even the established medical methods by several levels. Her hands never trembled, and her muscles showed no sign of fatigue despite the prolonged effort. The sight impressed him deeply and made him resolve to further refine his own physical conditioning. When Gamrosu finally spoke, she addressed Jongwoo and confirmed his identity as the demonic physician. She explained that the needles needed to be removed after an hour and asked him to take over, as she had reached her limit and needed rest. Jongwoo immediately agreed and assured her that he would handle the remainder. After leaving the room, Gamrosu encountered Yowon waiting outside, accompanied by the left and right guardians. Yowon asked about the outcome of the treatment. Gamrosu reported that although the damage had been present for a long time, Chun Yu-jong would recover. Continuous observation was still required, but he would awaken within 2 weeks. Yowon was genuinely astonished. Even NANO, with its vast medical database and scanning capabilities, had been unable to resolve Chun Yu-jong's condition. It reaffirmed to him that injuries caused by martial arts followed principles beyond what future medical knowledge alone could explain. Yowon thanked Gamrosu for her efforts and urged her to rest. She apologized briefly and took her leave. Shortly after, Hwan Yi hurried toward Yowon with barely concealed excitement. He reported that he had found what they were looking for. Yowon immediately took interest. The following afternoon, the Imperial Army completed its preparations to depart. The soldiers assembled neatly at the northern gate, awaiting the final order. Numerous cultists gathered to see them off, and Yowon himself came out to bid farewell to Ju Taehyun. Taehyun expressed his gratitude, stating that he had been treated exceptionally well and promising to inform the Emperor of the hospitality he had received. Yowon acknowledged this calmly and expressed satisfaction that Taehyun's stay had been pleasant. Nearby, a female servant stood beside Yowon, holding a tray with a scroll sealed with the Demon Lord's insignia. Taehyun asked whether Yowon had reached a decision. Yowon conveyed his answer with restraint, explaining that he would be sending a representative to the ceremony instead of attending personally. The response visibly disappointed Taehyun. His expectations collapsed, and his expression darkened. Still, Yowon maintained his composure and continued to see them off until Taehyun boarded the carriage. The departure order was given, and 2,000 Imperial soldiers began their march back toward the Imperial Palace. As the procession moved away, Yeon Nam-gun reflected inwardly that they were leaving without achieving their true objective. The Sage King, despite maintaining appearances, was clearly disheartened. Inside the carriage, Taehyun stared at the scroll containing Yowon's reply. Frustration overwhelmed him, and he lashed out, venting his anger at being treated courteously only to be refused in the end. He cursed Yowon inwardly, questioning his arrogance and resenting the refusal to appear before the Emperor despite a direct invitation. As his irritation peaked, something unexpected happened. A presence descended silently onto the top of the carriage, light as a falling feather. Taehyun felt it too late. When he tried to react, a powerful force sealed his mouth, preventing him from making a sound. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the figure standing before him. It was Chun Yowon. Yowon smiled coldly and sent his intent directly into Taehyun's mind, making it clear that he was well aware of the resentment Taehyun had been harboring. Terror instantly drained the color from Taehyun's face, and he shook his head frantically in denial. Taehyun tried to cry out, but his mouth was forcibly sealed by invisible pressure, crushing his jaw with pain. Yowon calmly noted that Taehyun was capable of telepathic communication, and Taehyun hastily confirmed it with repeated nods. Moments later, the restraining energy vanished, allowing Taehyun to gasp for air as he struggled to steady his breathing. Taehyun realized there was no point in screaming for help. The man before him possessed the power to annihilate the entire Imperial envoy without effort. Regret flooded his mind as he wondered why he had ever come to the demonic cult and placed himself in such a nightmare. Through telepathy, Taehyun asked when Yowon had entered the carriage. Yowon answered ambiguously, leading Taehyun to assume that Yowon had boarded the instant instant the carriage door had opened. The realization horrified him. To infiltrate the carriage without being noticed by countless guards and attendants meant Yowon's martial arts had truly reached an incomprehensible realm. In truth, Yowon had entered earlier, leaving Huan Yi behind wearing a skin mask to maintain appearances. Taehyun then asked why Yowon was inside his carriage. Yowon calmly conveyed that he was traveling to the Imperial Palace together with him. The words struck Taehyun like a thunderbolt. Panic surged, but he hastily tried to placate Yowon, fearing that his earlier disappointment might have angered him. He explained that his reaction had only come from regret over Yowon's refusal to attend the ceremony. Yowon dismissed the concern, stating that he had nearly grown irritated himself after misinterpreting Taehyun's emotions, but that the matter was settled. Taehyun immediately expressed relief, agreeing to anything just to keep Yowon calm. With the pleasantries over, Yowon turned to his real purpose. He informed Taehyun that he would be helping him. It was not a request, but a thinly veiled threat. Taehyun froze, instantly understanding the imbalance of power between them. Fear overrode pride, and he asked what Yowon wanted him to do. Yowon observed that Taehyun was unexpectedly sharp when it came to matters of survival, silently acknowledging that royal blood did not come without instinct. He decided to lead him carefully. Yowon explained that Taehyun had mentioned the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect attending the upcoming ceremony. He then revealed the truth that shattered Taehyun's remaining composure. Yukong, the official who had impersonated Taehyun a week earlier, had been a spy planted by the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect. Chun Yowon calmly laid out the situation to the bewildered Sage King Ju Taehyun. He explained how the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect had begun moving openly within the Murim, along with the series of incidents that had already unfolded inside the heavenly demon divine cult. He also revealed the horrifying method used by the sect to prevent information leaks. Living organisms planted inside people's bodies, designed to kill the host the moment exposure became likely. Taehyun was deeply shaken by the explanation, horrified by the idea that such devices could be embedded within human bodies simply to silence them. Yowon went further, stating that several spies from the same sect were still hidden among Taehyun's own imperial envoys. Taehyun immediately considered arresting them, but Yowon dismissed the idea. Acting too quickly would be dangerous, especially since it was still unclear how deeply the sect's influence had already penetrated the Imperial Palace itself. Only then did Taehyun fully understand why Yowon had secretly boarded his carriage. The man was not merely protecting the demonic cult, he was preparing to uproot something far larger. Taehyun weighed the implications carefully. Eliminating visible enemies was one thing, but confronting a hidden enemy embedded within the palace was another entirely. He could not help but wonder whether bringing Yowon into the palace was the right decision, even as he sensed that refusing him might be far worse. At that moment, Yowon struck directly at Taehyun's deepest ambition. He asked whether Taehyun truly did not wish to become the crown prince. The question stunned Taehyun. That desire was something he had only ever spoken of in private, believing no one else knew. Yet Yowon spoke as though it were obvious. Yowon then offered a decisive incentive. If the spies hidden within the palace were uncovered, Yowon would hand over all credit to Taehyun, allowing him to present the achievement as his own before the emperor. Yowon made it clear that his goal was eradication, not imperial favor. Taehyun fell into deep contemplation. If the spies and their mastermind within the palace were exposed, the emperor's trust would inevitably tilt in his direction. Such an achievement could allow him to surpass the Soul King and draw closer to the position of Crown Prince. With the NANO festival approaching, he desperately needed a decisive accomplishment. Still, Taehyun tested Yowon one final time, asking what would happen if he refused. Yowon left the answer deliberately vague, forcing Taehyun to imagine the consequences for himself. A cold chill ran down Taehyun's spine as he realized the truth. Yowon would act regardless of his consent. Resistance would only place him in danger. With no real choice left, Taehyun agreed. Yowon smiled in satisfaction, confident that their journey to the Imperial Palace would now proceed exactly as planned. Illumnian, the capital city of the Daimyong Empire, stood as the greatest metropolis in Jongyeon, a massive city of over 500,000 people located in the northeastern region of Henan province. Its colossal outer walls dwarfed even the fortress of the demonic cult, stretching so wide that it took nearly 2 hours to travel from the gate to the heart of the city. At its center rose the Dragon Palace, a magnificent complex crowned with golden roofs that radiated the absolute authority of the imperial family. Taehyun's imperial army passed through the southern gate of the Dragon Palace, and Taehyun stepped down from his carriage. His face carried deep fatigue and caution after the grueling 2-week journey. journey. Taehyun reflected on how they had finally arrived at the royal palace, recalling how the last 7 days before entering Hubei province had been especially unbearable. The silence during those days had weighed heavily on him as Chun Yo-won had remained beside him without uttering a single word. Only after entering Hubei had Yo-won temporarily left, disguising himself with Imperial Guard Li Han's skin mask, which allowed Taehyun some breathing room. The real Li Han was stationed at a demonic cult branch in northern Hubei, making Taehyun marvel at how Yo-won had prepared such a flawless replacement in just 7 days. So perfect that even Yeon Nam-gun, the commander of the guards, noticed nothing. Yeon Nam-gun issued orders for dismissal, instructing only 10 guards to remain in service to Taehyun, while the rest returned to their posts. Yo-won, walking naturally among them, was smoothly selected as one of the 10 without raising suspicion. Taehyun noticed this with astonishment, realizing that Yo-won had seamlessly positioned himself close without requiring any deliberate effort. Taehyun then proceeded toward the Emperor's palace. As they advanced deeper into the complex, Yo-won observed the overwhelming luxury of the surroundings. Even the inner palace of the demonic cult paled in comparison to the opulence displayed here. Elaborate decorations, refined architecture, and meticulously arranged landscapes filled the grounds. Ahead stood a large palace, and before the yard gate surrounding it were 30 men clad in blue robes. At their forefront stood a figure adorned with especially lavish ornaments and heavy makeup. Yo-won immediately associated the man's presence with the unsettling aura of Elder Hwan. These men were eunuchs. Yeon Nam-gun sighed quietly upon seeing them, recognizing the group as the East Spear, one of the most powerful organizations within the Imperial Palace, rivaled only by the Imperial Guards. Every eunuch present had learned martial arts, and their leader had reached the superior master level. Within the Great Ming Empire, only 4 organizations were permitted to cultivate martial arts. These included the Eastern Depot, the Western Depot, the Great Flourishing Depot, and the Emperor's Royal Guard, known as the Embroidered Uniform Guard. The 3 depots functioned as enforcement bodies that acted solely under the Emperor's command, wielding immense authority. They possessed the power to arrest anyone regardless of status, and even to imprison or execute on the spot. Over time, the depots absorbed the Embroidered Uniform Guards into their structure under the justification of expanded responsibilities. This consolidation sparked deep resentment and conflict, particularly between the commander of the Embroidered Uniform Guard and the admiral of the Eastern Depot, creating long-standing tension within the imperial power structure. Yo-won clearly sensed the emotions radiating from Nam-gun, who stood beside him. Disgust was written openly across Nam-gun's face, as though he had no intention of concealing his contempt. The admiral of the Eastern Depot, Oh Tae-sung, greeted the imperial party with exaggerated warmth, his demeanor dripping with false courtesy. Taehyun responded formally, acknowledging him with restrained politeness. Yo-won immediately noticed that Taehyun shared Nam-gun's dislike toward the eunuch. He observed Tae-sung more closely. He realized that the strange yin energy surrounding him was fundamentally different from the martial arts of the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect. He had previously assumed that, excluding the embroidered uniform guards, only a handful within the palace would possess martial arts. Yet here alone, several hundred individuals were clearly trained. At this rate, investigating everyone would take an unreasonable amount of time. Tae-sung commented on the difficulty of Taehyun's journey, but Taehyun maintained that he had merely fulfilled the emperor's command. Tae-sung then mockingly implied that Taehyun remained bold even after encountering the demonic cult, subtly belittling them as inferior. Taehyun faltered slightly at the remark, his gaze shifting unconsciously toward Yo-won standing beside him. Yo-won inwardly registered the insult, noting the deliberate contempt behind the words. Nam-gun stepped forward, asserting their role as Taehyun's escort. At that, Tae-sung's expression hardened. He declared that anyone below the 4th grade of subordination was forbidden from entering Jianan Palace without the emperor's explicit permission, insisting that only the southern military general could proceed. Nam-gun bristled internally, recognizing the eunuch's deliberate abuse of authority, especially given that they served under Taehyun himself. He then ordered the guards behind him to withdraw to the envoy. Tae-sung went further, smugly suggesting that even Nam-gun should return. Nam-gun clenched his teeth in silent fury at the provocation. Seeing this, Taehyun intervened sharply, reminding Tae-sung that it was the emperor's direct order for Nam-gun to protect him. Tae-sung immediately apologized, bowing low, though the mocking smirk on his face made the insincerity obvious. Taehyun reflected bitterly on how eunuchs like Tae-sung had grown increasingly arrogant since the Soul King's position had been solidified, throwing the chain of command into chaos through unchecked authority. Taehyun then sent a telepathic message to Yo-won. Yo-won calmly replied that he would not interfere and would meet him later at his residence. Having already gained a rough understanding of the palace's interior, Yo-won withdrew without hesitation. Taehyun acknowledged this and followed Taesung deeper into the palace. Once distance separated them from the palace officials, the members of the Gold Council could no longer contain their frustration. Their resentment toward the eunuchs and the Eastern Depot spilled out openly, particularly toward Taesung's blatant arrogance and overreach. Yo-won listened silently, his own irritation simmering beneath the surface. The Eastern Depot had already disrupted his plans, and Taesung's insult toward the demonic cult had not gone unnoticed. For now, Yo-won decided to focus on investigating 100 Households Yun, one of the suspected spies. Among the 5 suspects identified by Elder Hwan, 2 were embedded within the embroidered uniform guards. From Yo-won's sensing alone, Yoon's martial arts appeared no higher than first rate. The level itself was unremarkable, but Yo-won was certain that something about the man was being deliberately concealed. Yoon Baek praised the guards for safely escorting Ju Tae-hyun and announced that the Southern military general had granted them 4 days of rest. The soldiers responded in unison, relief spreading through the group. Yo-won felt a quiet sense of relief as well. Disguised as Lee Han, he had already been considering ways to avoid continuous guard duty, so he could freely observe Yoon Baek's movements and uncover his contacts. This arrangement suited him perfectly. At least that was what he thought. Yoon Baek suddenly addressed Lee Han directly and asked whether there was somewhere they needed to go. The question caught Yo-won off guard for a split second. He had momentarily forgotten that he was wearing Lee Han's identity. He quickly responded affirmatively and followed Yoon Baek without hesitation. Yoon Baek led the way, leaving the garrison and heading deeper into the palace residence. His steps were confident and familiar, as though he had walked this route countless times before. Yo-won sensed that this was intentional. Yoon Baek did not seem concerned about being seen. Rather, it felt as though he wanted to draw attention. Along the way, Yoon Baek took a long piece of cloth hanging among the palace laundry, wrapped it around himself, and instructed Yo-won to do the same. He explained that they would discreetly make their way to the 4th storage facility. Yo-won complied immediately. They moved swiftly through the palace corridors and eventually arrived at a massive warehouse. The moment Yo-won stepped inside, a strong scent of rice filled the air. Countless bales were stacked high, enough to sustain the entire Imperial Palace for a year. As Yo-won's senses expanded, he detected multiple presences within the building, people who had clearly trained in martial arts. Given their concealment within the palace, the possibility that they belonged to the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect could not be ignored. Following Yoon Baek deeper into the warehouse, Yo-won soon reached the innermost area. There, around 20 individuals dressed in long black robes stood in formation. One man sat atop a pile of rice sacks at the very center, while the others remained standing, positioned like escorts. From their posture alone, Yo-won immediately identified the seated man as the leader. Yoon Baek and Yo-won stepped into the middle of the space. After remaining silent throughout the walk, Yoon Baek finally spoke. He directly accused Yo-won of tampering with the real Lee Han. The sudden confrontation caused a brief ripple of surprise within Yo-won. Before he could react, Yoon Baek gave a sharp command to surround him. At once, the men stationed behind Yo-won moved in unison, sealing off the warehouse exits and cutting off any path of retreat. Yoon Baek suddenly raised his voice and declared that the man before him was a spy. Yo-won reacted by feigning confusion, maintaining an innocent demeanor as if he truly did not understand the accusation. Yoon Baek immediately explained his certainty. Lee Han had been his closest friend, and whenever the two of them were alone, Lee Han never spoke in such a formal manner. Moreover, the man had followed him without a single question, despite being led through an unnecessarily roundabout route. Those discrepancies alone were enough to prove that the person standing there was not Lee Han. The leader of the black-clad group finally spoke, questioning whether Yoon Baek was absolutely certain of the accusation. Yoon Baek answered without hesitation, affirming his certainty. At that moment, the leader's lips slowly twisted into a cruel smile. In his eyes, Yo-won was a dead man the moment he entered this ground, a fool who had stepped into a domain where survival was never an option. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.